Hey, welcome to my kitchen. Started joking that this is like a cooking show, but instead of making sourdough, I'm making ancient temple incense. And instead of charming stories about grandma's recipe book, you're going to get to hear any and all kinds of stories about ancient Egyptian mythology, religious practices, and some other weird stuff in between, depending on what questions come into the feed. Yesterday, I had mentioned that we're down to like one last ingredient that goes into the Kyphi mash, and then it's going to sit until Friday. And this particular ingredient is the one ingredient, sweet flag, also known as calamus root, that is just a little toxic and enough that in a powdered form, like I wouldn't want it to get into the air with the cats. So what I did, since it's going into the final cup of wine, I have prepared it all already, like it's all mixed up, and did that out in the garage because, quite frankly, I'm comfortable with my little recording studio here, and it's really windy right now where we're at, and really cold, and the garage is just a wind tunnel of sighing, howling wind, and it's chilly and just not very inviting. So I cheated. I did that ahead of time. We will add it to the Kyphi mash while we're on camera. So sweet flag, this particular thing, it's another tuber slash rhizome from I don't, not exactly an iris, but like it is a wetlands flower, and it is used as a fixative. You'll see sweet flag referenced in a number of older incense recipes, not just like the super ancient ones like Kyphi that's been around for 3,000 years and counting. But if you are someone like me who has dug through the Greek and Roman magical papyri and then the occult tradition of Western Europe with a lot of the grimoires and things, when they're talking about incenses for specific planets, specific days, specific spirits, sweet flag was something that came up a lot. Aloes wood was another one, as was mastic. And the funny thing is I've gone on about gum mastic in a previous, I guess these are episodes now, a previous day. Gum mastic is a resin, a little bit like frankincense, that comes from a specific tree. And the only trees right now that you can harvest the gum mastic tears from happen to be on the island of Chios. So it's usually known as Chios gum now. When I think the first time I read about mastic, it was in Francis Barrett's The Magus, which was my first book on ceremonial magic and demons and weird stuff when I was, I want to say 14. I was an early bloomer, at least as far as researching weird stuff goes. And at that time, I was like, mastic. I assumed for some reason that it was like mace. So like a spice that I kind of knew, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense. It makes a lot more sense now. Um, Interestingly, that sort of like, I think this is a thing, I'm not sure that this is a thing, sort of goes along with all the questions we have about the original accurate recipes for this ancient temple incense. I was going through my notes from last year because through this whole process, I jotted down stuff, I copied out the recipes, I wrote down from the various books that I resourced that had been referenced in things. So one of them that stands out is Plutarch's on Isis and Osiris. Uh, and this is one of those classical writers whose work came down to us long after the recipes for Edfu were no longer translatable. Because remember, at least as far as the Western world was concerned, we couldn't read Egyptian hieroglyphs again until a certain Rosetta Stone and Champollion came along, and they were just like, hey, there's a couple of things in here, and we've cracked this code that has left us baffled for centuries. So I'm going to actually quote a couple of pieces out of Plutarch's on Isis and Osiris. Uh, Kyphi is a mixture composed of 16 ingredients. He goes into a bunch of those ingredients. All of these ingredients are not mixed by chance, but according to instructions cited in holy books that are read to the incense makers while they mix them. As somebody yesterday had asked, Is there singing? Is there music as this process, this very long and laborious process is going on? In another text, there is a reference to priests reciting not just prayers, but also hymns. So at the very least, there was singing, there was vocalization that was going on. But Plutarch specifically tells us this was in holy books and sacred texts. So the making of the incense itself was sacred, and the process was read aloud as everyone was doing this. Unfortunately, we don't really have any of those holy books that we are aware of, nothing that has come down to us that we've translated yet, or that we've found, or that we have explicitly identified as being connected with this beyond the recipes like the ones that appear on the walls in the laboratory room at the temple complex in Edfu. Let's see. He's got a bunch more descriptions and things, but there was another quote here that was really, really useful. Trying to find the really neat language about like throws wide the gates of imagination, yada yada yada, because that just really stood out to me. Yes, this is from Dioscorides, 1st century of the Common Era, and it's from his De Materia Medica, which is a really, really long multi-volume set of medical texts and different medical practices, including recipes from the ancient world that he collected. This one really kind of says what Kyphi was believed to be at this point in time. Kyphi is a mixture of incense dedicated to the gods. Egyptian priests use it very often. It is also mixed with antidotes and is given in beverages to the asthmatic. There are many methods of preparation, one of which is the following, and he goes through a list of a whole bunch of things as well as measurements. It's pretty handy, except for the fact that they're in zesties and drachmae and manais, which we have to then figure out what's a drachma, what's a zesty, what's a manai.
We thought liters and pounds was hard.
Oh, yeah. Well, and to give you an idea, like, what was it? Half a zesty, which the scholar translating it says is 0.137 of a liter. But then you've got manai, which is like some of it 2,183 grams, 5,239 grams. One thing that's like over 2,000 liters. Like some of this stuff is not. This was bulk. They were making this stuff in bulk. That's the author who equates the Cyprus grass with galangal, or a relative of ginger. Let's see. I don't know. There's so many neat things that I have scribbled down in here. And some of this is to kind of waiting to see if people have questions too. I'm leading up to this last final kind of climactic, mixing of this stuff, the final cup of wine and the final 3 tablespoons of powdered sweet flag.
So there is a question about the price of ingredients
in
terms of how much to budget. I know you got enough to make fairly large batches.
Yeah.
But I also don't know. I don't know if you would even remember at this point how.
It kind of depends. If you're gonna do like the whole hog, like this whole thing, frankincense can range between a couple of dollars for an ounce to $60 for an ounce, depending on the type of frankincense and where you're getting it from. Like a lot of things, like there's multiple levels of quality. So you can go down to your regular like New Age witchcraft or herb store, and you can probably find like a little packet of frankincense tears. Myrrh the same way, like $1.60 or something would not be unusual for an ounce. And understand that that's some of the lower grade stuff, but that's fine if you're not trying to like do this entire laborious process. There's actually one of the ones in here. I think I mentioned it yesterday. It's from the Papyrus Harris in the British Museum, and it's from the 12th century of BCE. And that one has a simplified list of ingredients. So this is like the least of the things that you can get away with putting in it and still calling it Kyphi. The base of raisins and honey is implied in this instance, and I'm going to draft up a recipe based off of this that lets you make kind of a more modernized version of this that doesn't have the fruit base, so that you could feasibly burn it on a charcoal in the way that you are accustomed, most of us are accustomed, and not have the negative effects that happen when you make it in the ancient style, where it gets really gummy and really carbonized if it's too hot. So this one, mastic, pine resin, camel grass, which is just lemongrass, mint, ideally Egyptian mint, but any mild mint will do. I'm kind of leaning more toward cat mint for anything that's available to us over here than I might peppermint or spearmint, because they're sharper and a little bitter, and by all accounts, the mint that they were using was a much milder mint. Sweet flag, it's a fixative. Again, it helps to bring out the scent as well as to preserve that scent for everything else. Cinnamon, frankincense, myrrh. Lemongrass is pretty cheap. Mint is super cheap. It grows everywhere. The calamus root or sweet flag was a little tricky to get a hold of, but there was a little shop on Amazon called Small Flower. They're a little apothecary, I think, out of Chicago. They were really great to work with. They had a lot of awesome stuff, really good variety of things. Everything came in these cute little cardboard tube jar things. And you could get the calamus root, the sweet flag, either pre-powdered or ground kind of coarsely. I'm going to recommend getting it powdered, because this is the thing that you want to have mixed everywhere throughout the whole thing. It's also why I have pre-mixed it in the wine, because you want it to saturate the whole batter. So what's that? Depending on how much you're making, I mean, let's say you're making, a good handful of stuff, a couple of ounces of this, a couple of ounces of that, without the tools for doing it, because that copper pot was
pot, which is going to be $200 by itself.
Well, I don't even know if we can get the copper pot anymore. It was an Italian family. It was a lineage of coppersmiths. I'm afraid to reach out and see if they're still alive. There's been so many people who've died in Italy, and it would just break my heart. So if you're going to modernize it, make it with the basic ingredients. Make it in your regular Paul Revere ware, unlined metal, stainless steel, whatever. I don't know, probably $30 to $40 for a batch that you're making by yourself. I mean, don't quote me totally on that, because
some of the ingredients don't come in small enough.
But the thing is that's me reducing it to the least.
So portion
if you want the tiniest version of stuff and the simplest version of it, if you're trying to make basically bargain Kyphi within a budget, you could probably make something within $30 to $40, with the understanding that there's a lot of the initial stuff that you're leaving out. It does excludes a whole lot of other ingredients. That means no gum mastic, which right now you can't get, I don't think. The shop that I was getting my mastic gum from is currently closed down until further notice. They were on a little, they're over in Crete. Let's see, something like that. And God, the mastic is ridiculous. When it says it's 0.2 grams, do a little bit of measurement to figure out exactly how much that is, because that's barely a tablespoon in some cases. It's the conversions are tricky. Pine resin's pretty cheap. The trick is it's not used in modern incense making generally, unless it's pinon pine, some of the stuff from the Southwest. But if you just Google whack pine resin, mostly that's going to take you to a sporting goods store, and it's the rosin that you put on your fingers, in which case you need to make sure that it's not cut with other stuff. Yeah.
people are asking where they can get some of this delicious Kyphi.
I've
been letting them know that we
Yeah.
had some in our store until earlier today, but
Yeah.
we just sold the last one. So we're going to try to package some more up during this period when this
Yeah.
batch of Kyphi is curing. But it's
Yeah, because I've got several logs of it that I set aside, some of which I intended to use as basically the mother to try some variations. So use the base of the stuff that I made last year at this time and melt that down and then add some variations in the ingredients. Like I didn't want to do this entire process with ingredients like variations and then find that I hated it, like that it was terrible.
yeah, that's
So-
fair because
right.
it takes like a month
Right?
to make.
So instead I'm gonna like have like a little brick, melt that down, and then make a couple of changes, add a couple of things, put in like labdanum, galbanum, and try a couple of variations to just see like what does this do to the scent? How does that do to the scent? Like, does this completely screw the thing up?
Kelly's asking, was it the squishy Kyphi in the shop?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it
Yeah, it was a larger
it was the squishy stuff. If
non-benzoin.
people were at the Housekeepers Gather last year, I had an earthenware jar that if you opened it up, it almost looked like I had like little handmade candies inside of it. They were about the color of dark chocolate and about the texture of a Tootsie Roll. And
You say these words and it makes me want to eat them.
I mean, they looked like a confection, and like with the little bit of ground benzoin, it sort of looked like it was dusted with sugar. And benzoin's very sweet and almost has a brown sugar texture to it. So if you look at it, you're like, oh, this looks like candy. It's not. But the thing is that batch taught me that Kyphi making is a lot like candy making. Friday, we're going to do a lot of live streaming because I'm going to be very, very bored. I'm going to be parked over at this stove here, just boiling stuff down. And that process of boiling it down, I used to make fudge with my mom. I guess we do have some family stories about recipes. And I learned, that softball stage where you get it like, you take the sugar and you're getting it down to a point where it's starting to get sticky, and you have a little chilled cup of water and you drop it in. And if it kind of keeps its shape, it's in the softball stage, especially if it goes to the bottom and then kind of goes bloop. And it's not done yet. Like you can use that for syrup on your ice cream, but it's not quite done. And then there's like another stage where it holds its shape, but if you take it out, it's sticky and tacky. And then there's like the hard crack stage where you drop it in and it hits the cold water and it hardens. And you can pull it out and crack it. And that's where you're getting to hard candy kind of stuff. And when you're making fudge, you don't want to go all the way over there, but you also don't want like the softball stage. And in making Kyphi, I'd say that middle, like hard, like sort of like where it's like a hard, tacky, yeah. So anyway,
I'm just entranced by her descriptions of fudge.
I loved my mom's homemade fudge. Like
I love all fudge. I will eat all of anyway.
no, she would make this dark chocolate syrup to put on ice cream, and we'd have ice cream Sundays together.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
A really good memory for Mother's Day.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, we're part of the Dead Moms Club. I apologize if that's insensitive, but ours is dead. Both of ours moms. There's no English there. Both of our mothers have passed on, and we joke as people who no longer have living mothers that we were part of the Dead Moms Club. It's not a bad thing. It's just different.
I was really, really touched last year when the neighbor girls gave us a card for like being it was a card for being basically cat moms.
I know, they were so cute.
Sweetest thing. They're so ridiculous.
They are really sweet.
Somebody's asking, does it really take a month to make Kyphi?
Well, if you're recreating the recipe as it was done back then, you are adding 1 or 2 ingredients a day to the mash. And so I've actually cheated. I've merged on several days 2 or 3 ingredients so that I had a 5-day process with that. And then it needs to sit another 5 days. Every one of the recipes agree that while you are mixing it and putting it together, you want it to set for a little while. There's a number of reasons why you set it aside for several days. Different resources will tell you 5 days, 7 days, 10 days. I think that there are a couple of folks out there who do a full lunar cycle. The purpose is there's wine in here, there's all these different resins, and plant matter, roots, rhizomes, everything ground, and you're trying to get them to like just release all of their resinoids and all of their flavonoids and all of the things that make them smell good, that give them their unique properties. There is a chemical reaction that is going on there, and you want to give it time. So it's a little bit closer to beer making or wine making than it is lots of other things in terms of you do have to give it some time to percolate, to open up, and it's not like it is fermenting. Although I've got some debate about that based on the fruit base and a bunch of other things, but I'll bring it over here. It's not like it's not like it's foaming, which is how you would know it was fermenting. But in the same way that I used to make mead, I cover it with a cloth and set it aside. And like right now, it's just a batter. Sticky. The really long-term investment of time with this is letting it cure. I did not, well, let me be honest, like last year I wanted to be impatient. I was like, I made the Kyphi and I have a couple of weeks for it to cure, that'll be fine, right? It was not ready. It was really, really sticky. Anybody who handled it and interacted with it at the House Kepru gather last year, it stuck together. It didn't matter how much stuff you rolled it in or dusted it with. Like you picked it up and it would stick to your fingers. You would have resiny, Kyphi stuff just everywhere. And I started to worry that I'd screwed something up. Because there was a point when I was over here just endlessly stirring it, and I started to worry that I'd overcooked it.
I remember that.
So I put in like another half a cup of wine. And then like afterwards I was like, fuck, I screwed it up, shit.
Oh, no.
All of that money and all of that time and all of that, and I screwed it up. And months later, I mean like months and months later, end of summer, beginning of fall, I think it was closer to October of last year, I went back to some stuff that we had at Inspiration House, and it had cured the way that all of the research I'd done described it as curing, where it firms up. And while it's tacky if you want to squish on it, but you can handle it and you can roll it into balls, and it's harder, a little bit more like old taffy than a Tootsie Roll that's been sitting in your car in the 90-degree heat. I think different regions will have different times for it to cure. I am probably going to pick up a dehydrator. I jury-rigged something last year. We had a toaster oven, and I put it at like 150, and I kind of propped the top of it open, and I tried to like cure the Kyphi that way. I'm going to tell you right now, all that really did was that made some really weak Kyphi. The stuff that I put in there was not as good. It didn't get the same. This incense has an incredibly nuanced, layered, and complex scent. I'm standing over this right now, and mostly what I'm smelling is some of the green vegetal notes from the lemongrass and the mint, but also there's a very powerful, almost medicine-y anise-like smell, and that's from these Cyprus Rotundus, the little rhizomes. If you saw me just sitting there, pound, 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 pound in the molcajete, these things are a beast to try to work with.
They took hours.
Well, because you can't just grind them. They're so hard that you have to shatter them first, and then once they're broken up into smaller pieces, they'll grind. But otherwise, they are a pain. But of all of the weird ingredients that go into this, this is the one that, although they're hard to get a hold of, there's such a unique scent to them. And it's such it's sort of like the foundation stones to this stage of the mix. It has a lot in common with myrrh without being as resiny as myrrh. So it's like myrrh, but with a little bit of an earthy vegetal tone to it. So the Cyprus Rotundus I've told people before, right now, it's not something that's widely marketed in the United States. I've been able to acquire it from India once. This current round came from Korea, obviously South Korea. And it is something that we can grow here. It is not necessarily wide. You're not necessarily going to go down to a nursery and find it. It's called nutgrass or sedge grass. And the technical term is Cyprus Rotundus, basically, round cyperus. So you can probably track that down in some capacity. And again, it's one of the more exotic ingredients that if you're making kind of like the down and dirty version, and you include one of the weird ingredients that are hard to get a hold of, that's the one I would pick.
It does smell really good.
Yeah.
Like you took the lid off and I'm getting whiffs of it over here now.
Well, and so again, like this whole process is laborious, time consuming, and really expensive. Like, I'm not gonna lie. And since so much went into this, I splurged for my frankincense and for my myrrh. There's a company called Wild Tree Essentials, and all of their stuff is wildcrafted. And they have everything from, like, the basic frankincense tiers that you're going to find pretty much everywhere on the market, on up to different variations. Like there's mahogany gold, there's black hojari, there's the Omani green, there's like, class A and class B and like all of this stuff. And I think that last time I used mahogany gold, which was as expensive frankincenses go, kind of middle grade, but it's got a really neat warmer smell to it. A little bit of a honeyed smell even before you add honey to the frankincense, which is part of the process we're going to see on Friday. Black hojari is some of the more expensive stuff. I'm tempted to use it here, and I haven't made up my mind. I really do like the mahogany gold for kind of like what it does and how it mixes with all the other scents. So, yeah, and the myrrh, Arabian myrrh was the stuff that I splurged on instead of just wherever. I mean, this stuff is harvested in a bunch of different places. You can get it from, let's see, Oman, Ethiopia, different parts of India. We can't get many things from Iraq or Iran currently because sanctions. I'm not sure about Oman anymore either. Like, there was some, unfortunately, most of these things come from a part of the world that's, even before a global pandemic, currently has been a little tumultuous. So, great irony is so much of it doesn't really grow in Egypt anymore. To be fair, I don't know how much of it actually grew in Egypt itself because they traded for so much of it. All right, we're gonna.
Delicious. It really does look like the rolls. Now you've got it. I'm just thinking about chocolate today. What is this?
The world is mighty good to me because Tootsie Rolls are all I see.
Oh no. Then we became a Tootsie Roll commercial after we were a fudge commercial.
Yep, from
and
the
a black hojari incense.
I really what okay, so as wild tree, if you're gonna go the more expensive route for your frankincense, I recommend them because after doing research on 5 or 6 different places that were all, we sell the high-end stuff, they were worth the price. They were a competitive price considering the prices on those things. And they were just really nice, polite people to work with. So that always counts for a lot for me. This is our last cup of red wine, covered and filled with 3 tablespoons of ground sweet flag, otherwise known as calamus root. Do you want to pick that up and kind of aim it in here as I stir? I'm going to get all of this out of here.
We're levitating. I'm trying to stay out of the other frame.
That's fine. I'll just...
You're not trying more.
No, I'm not. All right. So now it's just slowly.
Gosh, it's really thick.
It's very thick. So the difference, the first Kyphi I made last year, the base was dates, not raisins. And it was the best, a little chewier, because dates are very heavy in sugar. They are very gummy, lots of like fibrous stuff, and they ended up having just a very different texture even at this point. Why dates instead of raisins? One of these guys, let me find it, because it's why this like kind of made me question, do you really mean raisins? Are you sure you don't mean dates? Yeah, come on, where are you? Yeah, stone the dates, stone, this amount of raisins, stone them and wash the insides.
Gotcha.
Doesn't sound like raisins. Not any raisins. And I, being the completionist that I am, reached out to a bunch of different companies in other countries that sold raisins, different varieties of raisins. So we weren't just talking like, California raisins. Several like kind of heirloom stuff, older ones, forget the names of them. But I basically bought a variety of different raisins to see, are there raisins from the regions where they might have been getting them that are big enough and fat enough and have seeds that are large enough that I could cut them open, pull the seeds out, and feasibly have anything on the inside that I would be washing. And the answer is no.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
So I'm not sure if raisins just means dried fruit.
Yeah, that translation issue, it's real, especially with such specific ingredients.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go check on whether people have any questions.
Yeah, you can.
If not, I'll just come back
and
hold this iPad up.
Yeah, at this point, I'm just making sure everything is neatly mixed in.
Oh yeah, was Kyphi traded outside of Egypt?
Yes, I believe so. I don't know in the earlier days if that was true, but by the time that Egypt was under rulers like Cleopatra, when there was a lot of exchange with the Greek and Roman world and parts further to the east, there's definitely mention of Kyphi, or at the very least, other cultures like the Greeks and the Romans wanting to create it themselves. I don't know how much this was a proprietary thing earlier, because it was a temple incense. It was used in worship. It was the incense burned daily in the evening. So I guess nightly. Specificity, unless, otherwise I invite people to correct me on the internet.
Question from someone, what was the incense used for?
So, Kyphi, sometimes known as the sense that delight in the night. That's yet another one of the ancient quotations. It was, so first and most basic, it was burned in the evening as part of the ritual of the temple's day. And it was sort of welcoming the sun as the sun started the transition from being in the world and basically being alive during the day and then transitioning into the underworld. A simple way of understanding that is you've got 12 hours and 12 hours, and there's the 12 hours of the day, and the sun is alive, and you can see it up in the sky, and when the sun set, it was believed to descend into the underworld and go through 12 hours of night, in a place sometimes called the Duat. And it traveled through that. There's some interesting depictions that show as the sun is setting, it's literally being swallowed by Nut or Nuit, the goddess of the sky, and her belly is full of all the stars, and the sun's transit is through her innards through those 12 hours and then rebirthed in the morning. So it goes in her mouth at night and then comes out the other part of her for dawn. So other things that it was done, that Kyphi was burned for, it was believed to inspire visions and awaken the imaginative function that made human beings more receptive to visions and dreams and communication from the other realm. At the same token, it was also seen as something that kind of opened those gates, opened those doors to facilitate communication with spirits and the gods. There are ties to Osiris, and some of the texts describe how the multiple ingredients in Kyphi represent the different parts of the god Osiris, who there's a fairly famous myth where he's torn apart. His body parts are scattered all over, up and down the Nile, and his wife Osiris, or his wife Isis, or Aset, goes up and down collecting the pieces of her murdered and dismembered husband and puts them back together and mummifies him and brings him back to life just long enough physically to conceive a child, Horus, the child Horus, or the Horus the Younger. And then Osiris, who has a different type of life now as a mummified being, it becomes the king of the underworld.
It just got super dark outside.
Oh, it's been storming.
Yeah, it's raining a lot right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm back.
Well, hopefully it's not another tornado, because that was
my
exciting
gosh.
the other week, or when was it, last
That
month?
was like a month ago.
That was a month ago. Okay,
Yeah.
no more tornadoes, because that was a little too close for comfort.
Yeah, I think they finally finished cleaning up all the trees that came down in people's yards. Luckily, not too many in houses, at least.
Yeah.
Here. Were the ingredients for Kyphi as rare and expensive in the ancient world as they are now?
Some of them certainly. The funny thing is like that thing from the 12th century BCE, from the reign of Ramses. Ramses III. We have that list of ingredients because it's a record of the donations to the temple of ingredients for the sacred stuff. So it was stuff that you would gift to the temple to help support the temple. A great deal of the trade in Egypt was to acquire these rare ingredients and incense components so that they could be used in the temple. Definitely, this was a precious substance. This was a cherished substance. The downside is where we're at now. It's not merely that they're hard to get a hold of. It's also that a lot of them have been over-farmed and over-sourced. And so there's some question about whether or not frankincense will go extinct. That's another question about some of the ingredients that we're not totally sure what this is. We have a best guess, but we don't know for sure, and different scholars have different interpretations. There's every chance that those are ingredients that simply don't exist anymore because they are in fact extinct. I'm going to grab a little thing to scrape this off here.
I think the comment that's coming up most often right now is that people love the kitchen.
Well, that's a Illyria gave me a gift when she moved in. This kitchen was ugly. I mean, no two ways about it. It was not attractive, and I actually like to cook. I love cooking, and it was a kitchen of sadness. Like, there was so much potential, and it had like this ugly. The tile was like this vinyl tile that sort of looked like the stain on a baby's diaper. Like, it was yellow and brown, and it was hideous.
It was exactly the right color of yellow and brown.
And I'd lived, like, I'd had it because I don't know what they tell you in TV land or anything else, but like even writers with 30 books out, you don't make bank. I kind of maybe married money. But anyway, Illyria came into the rescue, and we put our heads together and kind of came up with what our ideal thing would be, and found honestly a decently priced thing. Like, they were good to work with. I think the most expensive thing was the tile that they put in, because they had to do all that by hand, and that was pretty laborious.
actually, given that it's Mother's Day, it's a perfect day to say thank you to the mama, from which all of the resources came.
Yeah, if not for the mother and the grandmother, this kitchen would look very different.
And I wouldn't be here because they wouldn't have had me.
That's fair too. That's fair. Okay, so the other thing I brought up, because a bunch of people have been asking about books and resources, and I've got an extensive library. I don't know if you can tell, I read a lot, and I've read a lot about ancient Egypt particularly, but it's by no means the only thing that I've dug into. So the first question a bunch of people had asked was, is there a good book on Egyptian mythology, a good place to start? And I'm going to say that the single best place to start is Egyptian Mythology by Geraldine Pinch.
Can you actually bring it closer to over here?
Yeah, just kind of guide.
That's good.
Okay, so this is a really good starter source of Egyptian mythology. It's good and academic and scholarly without being confusing or like actively writing over the reader's head, which is my big complaint with a lot of scholarly texts. So Egyptian Mythology by Geraldine Pinch is a really good place to start. This one's good too. It's not as good as Pinch in my opinion, but your results might vary. It's Gods of Ancient Egypt by Barbara Watterson.
Oh, this is tricky.
Yeah. How about?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Come closer, come closer. Perfect.
Okay. Gods of Ancient Egypt. This one has lots of illustrations, several full-color plates and things. If you want to start delving into the magic, there was a lot of magic in ancient Egyptian stuff, and there's a lot of bad sources on that. There's a lot of like really new age-ified sources that individual results will vary for how that speaks to you and if it's useful to you. But I particularly like Christian Jack's work with some of the stuff that he looks into. He's got a bunch of neat stuff. Various things that are dear to my heart. He, acknowledges fun things like how Horus and Set are actually twins who are kind of eternally conjoined as these universal principles. You kind of can't go digging into ancient Egyptian stuff without at least an overview of their language. There's so much about like the way they looked at the world. Language reveals kind of the architecture of the mind, the way in which the universe is structured for a people. And if you want to poke a little bit at that, Decoding Egyptian Hieroglyphs is a good one. Simple. You're not going to come out of it being able to sit down and read your own copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but it will give you a good handful of words and terms and concepts. And along the way kind of teaches you a lot about the philosophy and the practices.
There's actually a question. Yeah. Do we know if Kyphi was ever used for ritual purposes outside of Egypt? I mean, I guess we know it's been used in Ohio in recent years.
So, yes, there is a recipe recorded in Syriac in a manuscript from, I want to say over this way, like Jordan, Syria. So we know that it's spread out. And in research that I've done, unrelated to Kyphi, actually, it was stuff I was doing for the Dictionary of Demons, there are these texts called the Greek and Roman Magical Papyri. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there, demons and summonings and bindings and scrying and divinations. And there are, in one of them, the Leiden Papyrus, and in several others, references to incense that you burn when you are summoning certain spirits or when you are going to do a bowl divination and call something up for answers. And there are references to incense, in several cases, full-on recipes. And the basic style of these. Several of them, if they're not explicitly Kyphi, they are at the very least inspired by the way in which it was made. So there's references to like pounding a fig or pounding a date as your base, and honey and frankincense and myrrh, and like all of the things that are very familiar. And so it was used not only by a priesthood, not only within the temples, but probably was co-opted by magical practitioners who were operating outside of the priesthood, outside of the temples. The relationship between magic and religion has always been a weird one. Religion generally, in a very broad way, is what is sanctioned, and in a lot of ways what is also structured. The people who are given the gold star of like, you are allowed to be doing the weird stuff. You can talk to spirits, you can talk to gods. It's okay within these boundaries. And magic, practitioners of magic are the ones who work outside of those boundaries, who aren't necessarily sanctioned, who may be using it for subversive, and if not subversive reasons, then just their own personal reasons that are outside of the temple or traditional religious structure.
There's a question about Kyphi. Okay, what a rare topic. Do you use this incense before you do a walkthrough to help you better communicate with what is going on in a location?
Not frequently, because I don't always have the option to guarantee that I'm going to have the burner and the stuff, or that, I'm not going to get stopped by the TSA as they're like, what is this weird brick of gummy stuff? Black tar heroin. No, Kyphi. Let me give you a 30-minute dissertation on what the hell this actually is. But if you caught Haunted Salem live, we very intentionally made use of it for Haunted Salem live. It was burned throughout the time that Jack and Katrina were investigating in that great hall, as well as when the reenactors were doing their thing. And we used it when I did a traditional bowl divination with Jack to open up his third eye and give him psychic abilities for the duration of a ritual that I was recreating from the Leyden papyrus, which I mentioned earlier. So I have used it to that effect, and it's a really, well, actually no, we've used it here for spirit communication too. Not so much for walkthroughs, but for my group, we work with, we call them disembodied, and I think for most people's magical parlance, just call them spirit guides or ancestor spirits. They're connected to us, and there are certain times of the year where we're more inclined to talk with them. And we've been, since I started making Kyphi, we've been burning Kyphi as part of that, to sort of like open things up, to encourage, to make an offering to them, and to facilitate the communication.
No more questions at present.
Okay.
If you want to keep going through those exciting looking books.
I mean, you can't go delving into ancient Egyptian stuff without reading the Book of the Dead. There are many translations of it, and quite frankly, there's a lot more to the Book of the Dead than just one book. It's a very complicated text. There's pyramid texts, there's coffin texts, there's the later stuff that's generally the Book of the Dead. One of the better translators is R.O. Faulkner. Faulkner, just like the Sound and the Fury Faulkner, if you are familiar with that author. It's not the same guy, but that's how you spell the name. This is one of my favorite translations. You will find translations by A.E. Wallace Budge. You will also certainly find people debate the usefulness of Budge as a source. I'm not going to shit on the man, because he did do a lot for getting stuff translated, and he's not wrong all the time. But he is definitely someone who was working at the tail end of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, and he had some, we will say, liberally interpretive moments when he wasn't sure what a translation actually said. So Faulkner's a much better place to go. So let's get into a little bit of the weirder stuff, because this is more okay, ancient Egypt from a cut and dried, like more academic way, more traditional interpretation. If you want to dig into some curious thoughts about some of the practices, especially Set, who is made to be a bad guy in the Osiris myth and in the contendings of Horus and Set, but has a very, very different mythology long before that. I strongly recommend the works of one Mog Morgan, and the Bull of Ombos is the one that I've got currently, but I'm going to be acquiring a bunch more of their books because I have seen how many more they've been publishing.
Oh dear. I mean, there's space on at least a few of the shelves, like the shelves that are on top of the bookshelf.
So this one gets a little bit into Ancient Aliens territory, but in a way that is less, because some of them are just Serpent in the Sky by John Anthony West. If you want to start to poke at like some of the less standard interpretations, this one's interesting to read. Also, he's not just talking out of his ass for all of it. It's not Ancient Aliens every other page. Like there's some really insightful stuff. And this one, I don't know that anybody can get a hold of it anymore. Like this is a really interesting take on like the shamanic qualities of some of the ancient Egyptian practices. It's called The Jackal at the Shaman's Gate.
That is an amazing illustration.
Yeah. Now, I present this one with full knowledge that some of the books I have are rare and out of print, and I've made the mistake in the past of being like, dude, you should totally look up this book. And it's a great book. And then they go to Amazon or Abe Books and it's got like a $2,000 price tag. And it didn't cost that for me.
Got in at the right time. Gosh.
Yeah.
There was a question.
Yeah.
Do you sell your own books on your website?
Oh, yes, actually. And my wife even makes sure that they go into the mail.
Make sure they're all signed.
Yeah.
You have to fight with your cat for space on your lap to sign them. Oh.
Yes, everything that I write is up on the website. And obviously there's the whole Kyphi thing. Like there's a book that's coming out of this at some point. Just I'm still in the process of doing the field research, like actually making it and playing with it. One of my main goals at this point is, having made it the traditional way a couple of times now, how do I retool it to a workable modern recipe that captures the scent and the feel of it without breaking your pocketbook? Because if I were in a completely, honestly, like 10 years ago, there's no way I could have done this at all. I happen to be in a privileged position where I can go, hey, I'm going to try to recreate this bizarre, rare, super extra ancient Egyptian. I mean, like, this is super bougie stuff. So how do I make it so the me of 10 years ago would have been able to make it and use it? And that's what I need to solve before I like put a book out there, because I don't want to just be like, well, you too could have this thing and be so fancy that we are buying rarefied styles of frankincense number 1583 of batch 14 over on that farm.
You sound like a wine drinker. I mean, I could
Oh, that's right. I
about,
did say I have used all of the wine out of this bottle that I need, and there's a little bit, and since I don't drink it and I don't want it to go to waste, I bequeath upon thee, my beloved, have the rest of the wine.
I am here for you.
Cheers.
I am your very own trash panda.
that you are.
That's a lot of wine.
Yeah, well, you don't have to finish it.
I think I can do it. I think I can.
Okay,
I can.
That's a good amount.
Yeah, but it's not as strong as port, and I can drink port.
That's fair. You're good Russian stock.
That's right.
Is it?
Oh my gosh.
Is it good?
Wait.
It's Sang de Gita.
No wonder the Kyphi smells so good. This tastes amazing.
Well, so I had to wing it. Like I had to just be like, which is a sweet. Oh God, I can't. This one feels right.
I don't remember if I've had this.
No, I don't think that you have.
Because it's for Kyphi.
Yeah.
Now it's in danger.
Okay.
The stash.
Well, it was over at Bueller's.
Oh, okay.
The one on River Styx. Yes, we live near a road called River Styx. Couldn't make that shit up if I tried. Sleepy Hollow is just one town over.
I'm going to fancy drink it with you. And
Pinky up, pinky up.
It is.
Oh, okay. Okay. By the way, we're all so ridiculous.
Creep away with my wine.
Let's see.
Okay, some more questions.
Yeah.
Oh, what is the wine? Because I don't think people got to see the label.
It is Sang de Gita, which I believe translates to Blood of Judas. It is red, sweet, and effervescent.
Boy, is it good.
Okay.
If you like white wines or ports or ice wines,
Yeah, it also wasn't.
you will love this.
I think it was under $20 a bottle. It was not
Yeah,
stupid
this-
expensive.
Full disclosure, I don't actually like wine.
Yeah.
I have found a couple of whites that I can drink, but mostly they just leave me with a sour stomach and feeling slightly unhappy. And for this one, it's worth it.
I mean, given the fact that I like legit gave some thought to brewing my own wine for this, but I figured I was waiting long enough for the Kyphi to cure. I didn't want to wait long enough to create old wine.
That's fair. Here's an interesting question for you. This one hasn't come up yet.
Okay.
Do you believe that aliens helped the Egyptians?
I don't. I think actually it's kind of insulting to humans to think that any great monuments in the ancient world could only have been built with intervention of an advanced culture that was not us. I very much fall firmly on the side of, I think there was an advanced culture. I don't think it had to be aliens. I think it was people. And I think there's an author, Charles Hapgood. He's a scientist. He was a contemporary of Einstein, very controversial. And he wrote a book called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. He's also the person who invented Hapgood's rule, which is still used in science. And to put simply, it's you only find what you're looking for, which is true. Like confirmation bias guides us when we are doing research, when we are putting experiments together. Like Hapgood's rule is really important to keep in mind. And he applied the bias of Hapgood's rule to some of our interpretations of history and said, all right, if we only find what we're looking for, what if I remove myself from the expectations of how history was put together? What if I remove myself from this thought that our ancestors were idiots, that progress is a constantly ascending line, and that if you go back 100 years, people were nothing like us because they were not nearly as advanced as we are. And if we go back 1,000 years, then they're just so stupid they completely couldn't do these things. But the Romans had fast food and hot and cold running water and a whole bunch of other things. Like Rome is almost indistinguishable. If you flash back, like it's filthier. It's certainly filthier, and on many different levels. And instead of ketchup, you had garum sauce, which, look it up, it's terrifying. But the idea is, just because it was 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, were people so different that somehow their status as our ancient ancestors meant that they were also idiots, fools, incompetent. With Egyptian art, there's always some people who are like, yeah, but the Egyptians, man, like, they're all these times ago, and like their art was such a way, and like they drew the things the exact same way. This one isn't a good example just because it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, look at how weird and stylized that is. They don't even look really like people. Like, what are they doing there? Like, that's not, modern art looks different. We can make it really look like people. And the thing about that is Egyptian art was stylized, um, and that was part of its meaning. Art and language, image and language were inextricable for them. Um, the Eye of Horus, which is a symbol that a lot of people are very aware of. It's that Susie and the Banshees. If you're a goth, you know the Eye of Horus because you probably painted part of it on your face. The heavy kohl here and it goes out here, there, little curly Q, heavy eyebrow. That's the Eye of Horus. What you don't know when you're drawing that over and over again because you're an extra goth like I was, implicit in that image are all of the signs for the fractions that taken together make up a whole, make up the number 1. Each of the little pieces of this stylized image taken separately are 1/2 and 1/4 and 1/8, and all together they make 1. And that one image represents, it's called the Eye of Horus because in the contendings of Horus and Set, Horus whacks off Set's testicles, and Set pokes Horus in the eye. Horus's eye is wounded. And there's some magic and things that happened, and Horus's wounded eye goes from the wounded eye to the whole eye, the eye that is made whole again. There's some stuff about the moon and the sun and eclipses and celestial phenomenon kind of like woven into that. But when you look at the symbol, the Eye of Horus, it is a whole because it also is representing that entire myth, that entire story of the whole eye, the eye that was made whole, and the eye that is made up of the sum of its parts. When just one image, one icon, can have that much information encoded in it. And, from the perspective of archaeologists in the 19th century, Budge and folks who were like, kind of fumbling their way toward understanding how any of this worked, that would have been unthinkable because these people were thousands of years ago. They had to be stupid. They had to be primitive. Their religion wasn't Christianity, so obviously it was superstition. Obviously it was inferior. And that sense of the inferiority of the past because it doesn't look like the present is absolutely at the heart of some of the ideas that aliens must have been the ones who did this. Now, I'm not going to say that aliens have never visited the planet. I lean more toward the sense that I don't think that they came here in saucers. If there are beings from elsewhere that are here, I suspect they had different ways of transporting themselves, and in ways that we may find extraordinary, that we may not even be able to imagine yet. So I'm not going to say that there weren't aliens. It's interesting as somebody who has spent a lot of time studying like the Book of Enoch material, the stuff about the Nephilim and the Watcher Angels. It's really easy to read that as a story of these are an alien race, a different race that people are encountering, and they are very strange in their civilization and in their ways, and even the way they look, and the fact that they're taller than everybody. And Andrew Collins, who I recommend looking into his book From the Ashes of Angels, has a different take, which is just simply why not just a different group of people? People from over yonder who, yes, they look different. I mean, the planet is full of people who don't look like one another. And when we are isolated, we're in our own tiny little village, and suddenly the folks from way over there make it over here, and they have hair that's a different color, or their eyes are a different color, or, oh God, heaven forfend, their skin's a different color. We're just like, ah! I mean, people wig out just because something's uncertain, unknown to them. It's new. That's a visceral human reaction. And if you are looking at that reaction as it is recorded thousands of years ago, the people writing their reaction about these really weird people came through and they were super tall, and I think that they were aliens. They might have been demons. They really might have been demons because I've never seen anything that looked like this before. And just think about human nature. It's really easy to other someone who doesn't look like you. So I'm more of the mind that what we're looking at back then is people. The alien is us.
Here's another interesting question for
Yeah.
you. Do you know if the ancient Egyptians believed in vampires?
So it's interesting because if you ever read Anne Rice, of course, her vampire origin story goes back to ancient Egypt. Some of the reason I started poking at ancient Egyptian stuff initially was everybody was like, oh, vampires go back to ancient Egypt. And they do and they don't. The idea of beings, living human beings or spirits that can take life force that feed off of others. Yeah, you absolutely find that in Egypt. In the Book of the Dead, one of the reasons that you, as a living person, as a surviving person, go and give offerings to the dead person at the tomb is you don't want their spirit to fly forth and take what it needs and what it wants from the living. So there's definitely a belief that the dead can move about, if not physically, because physically the mummy is there, but in spirit, in a form. And there's multiple types or parts to the ancient Egyptian soul. There's the Ka, there's the Ba, there's the Ak, there's the Ren, and that's a lot of complicated stuff. It's harder to wrap your head around because we are in an Abrahamic culture where in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, there is this body and there's the soul, and that's pretty much it. So the idea that there's multiple pieces to a soul or fragments or multiple souls in one body is really hard for us here to wrap our heads around. But you go back then, the Ka, whose hieroglyph is raised hands like this. So you'll see a couple of little statues with these raised hands on their head, and they're walking out of the tomb. And that's the Ka flying forth from the tomb. Well, the Ka was one of the ones that you wanted to make sure that the Ka got everything that the Ka wanted, because you didn't want the Ka being pissed off and coming out and taking it, taking that vital substance, taking things from the living. Interestingly, I've got it over here, our little Book of the Dead, which is more properly titled The Book of Going Forth by Day. It's not just a manual for how to navigate death and the moments after it. It is a manual for learning how to go forth by day once you have become an awakened being who is living with your mummy, your physical remains, as sort of like the anchor. You carry on a new life in the tomb. And in doing all of this stuff, you are allowed to go out into the world, and you are allowed to eat, and you are allowed to drink, and you have the power to, oh God, some of these are some of my favorite poetry where there's several spells in this cycle where you eat the power from the bellies of the gods. You learn how to devour the magic in the stomachs and the viscera of other beings to sustain yourself. So that's pretty explicit.
But only if you're coming at it from a point of view where energy is a thing.
Yeah.
And people can take vital energy from other people.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, but and you're eating power from the bellies of the gods. You have the ability to devour this, to feed yourself. All of that stuff is there. So what I can say is it's really easy reading that stuff to see how there's a descent of mythology that comes down, concepts that work their way through from that ancient culture to ours. And kind of goes through this complex evolution from the Egyptians to the Greeks to the Romans to the Middle Eastern, the many, the Ugaritic and the folks over in Israel and all the rest of them. There's so many different ancient cultures over that way that I'm not even going to rattle them off right now because I'm going to get half of them wrong. and then it comes down to us. Like there's lots of ways in which it shifts and change. You put Christianity in the mix and blood becomes this potent substance that people are drinking, because it's a huge no-no in Jewish stuff. And I've mentioned the Book of Enoch, and in there you have the children of the Watcher Angels, the ones that have come down, explicitly drinking blood as one of the great things that they're doing. That's a no-no. They drink the blood of others and of one another, if the text is to be believed. So there's a lot.
Yeah, there is. There's a little bit of a discussion on
Yeah.
otherkin happening on the chat. Gosh, there's a bunch of like things that are hard to word because because this is gone now.
Oh wow.
I
It was good?
It was really good.
Cool.
Still trying to navigate the chat though.
Hey, good conversations and discussions. Like there's so much to dig in and dig through.
There really is. One follow-up question to the book of Going Forth by Day.
Yeah.
Could it be boiled down and described as a book about how to move around in the spirit world?
Yes.
Okay.
Including, so it's incredibly, the ancient Egyptian views of the afterlife, or at least the other world, because it's incredibly complex. Their whole cosmology is incredibly complex, and partly because there's this one time period where when you die you go to the field of reeds, and there's this one time period where you go and you become an immortal star, and and they kind of just mushed them all together. So to make it simple, the Book of Going Forth by Day, the instructions in what we know as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, teach you how first to, well, survive as a spirit, not be judged, not be destroyed. If you've ever seen depictions of the Hall of Judgment, it's usually, you'll usually see Thoth or Tahuti, Anpu or Anubis, jackal-headed god, dude with a big long beak. Thoth is the scribe of the gods, and the main thing is that you'll see is this scale. And on one side of the scale is a human heart, and on the other side of the scale is what looks like if you don't know what you're looking at, you might think it's a leaf. It's actually an ostrich feather, and it represents Ma'at. And Ma'at is a principle that we don't have a good translation for. Most people translate it as like righteousness or right living, and that's sort of it. Like living by the right order of the universe is kind of the best way I could.
Living in harmony.
Yeah. So if your heart is heavier than the feather, you get fed to Amit, the devourer, who is this chimerical composite critter that's part lion and part hippopotamus and part crocodile. And she just goes, whoop, and you're gone. Negated. You no longer exist. That's the biggest punishment in most of their stuff, is to simply be erased. That plays out when various pharaohs or royal personages that pissed people off or did something inconvenient in history, or if like things shifted and like these people now are in charge and they don't want you to talk about those people, they would put that into practice, like literally striking the names from the record, erasing them as people, erasing every instance of their name in a magical act intended to erase them from the world, because one of the beliefs was someone was immortal as long as someone remembered their name. As long as their name existed, there was still a little bit of their power, a little bit of their essence that existed that could then go back to and support their soul, their spirit. So first step, you go down there, you get weighed and judged. There's this whole like confession by negation where you have to recite like all the things that you didn't do, even if you did do them. Like you have to just very convincingly tell the gods, I totally never did that. And if you're found wanting, gulp, you're done. But it's not over yet. Like there's all of these stages of this underworld. I'd mentioned the sun's journey down through the Duat and these 12 stages of night. There's gates, and at each gate has a name, and each gate has at least one keeper, and that keeper has a name. And if you're going to pass through this rather perilous journey to like find all of your power and become one like the gods, You have to know the name of the gate. You have to know the name of the gatekeeper. You have to be able to basically convincingly have passage. And so a lot of this is about portions of it weren't just buried with the person, they were wrapped in with their mummy wrappings. They had amulets buried with them. These were things that were meant to be carried into the underworld, into this, on this journey, to go, oh no, I've got this scarab instead of my heart, and the scarab is totally cool. Like, my heart might be heavy, but you want to weigh that. We're good. And the amulets are to protect you, and the prayers that you need to remember are like basically crib notes. You got them on you. Okay, wait, what am I supposed to say at gate number 3? Okay, open sesame.
There's actually an interesting question that goes along with this, but instead of ancient Egyptian, it's asking about your personal beliefs.
Okay.
Do you believe it takes a person some time to realize they've passed away and to be able to move around and visit loved ones or use their energy to move things?
I think it varies from person to person. And how a person dies, the circumstances under which they die, can play a big role in that. Some people have really traumatic deaths, and it leaves them very confused. Some people have, lived in such a way and died in such a way that they like kind of met death head on. And even if they were young, you don't have to be old to like, have this wisdom. Like you die kind of eyes wide open, and you've got a better handle on stuff. Like you kind of can make choices. So it will vary. In Tibetan Buddhist beliefs, there's like a pretty set time period during which a person sort of adjusts to the process of being dead and being a disincarnate entity, and kind of like works out the kinks of moving around. And you see a little bit of that kind of play out in Ghost, that Demi Moore, Patrick Swayze movie. And as much as that's a movie, like that plays out in a lot of religious beliefs that allow for survival after death and not like immediate assumption into heaven. So there is a learning curve, and different spirits can let themselves get like really caught up in still thinking like a living person. And in that respect, they kind of burden themselves and hold themselves back. And until they sort of sort their shit out, you may find that they're just kind of like going through the motions. They're sort of like stuck in a cycle, or just mired in their trauma. And again, it will vary from person to person.
Another interesting question. The question is not meant to be morbid.
Okay.
Are you looking forward to death and the journey?
It's always fun. It's never boring. Yeah, I mean, I'm good with it. I've done it a bunch of times before, even in this life. So for me, it's not an intimidating process. And maybe part of that, if you don't believe in reincarnation, spoiler, I do. My early childhood experiences might have set me up for these attitudes, because I was born with a heart defect. I died, I know for a fact I died on the operating table at least once. I did have a near-death experience. I was raised by people who helped me come to terms with the likelihood of my own mortality as a child. I had a life expectancy of 5. I was not expected to survive past that unless they were able to get all of the things fixed. And we were kind of racing against time because we didn't have the technology all put together. I was one of the first ones in the state to survive the surgery I underwent. And I know for a fact I was the first one in the hospital to survive it. So death has been with me.
Oh, I think we're actually at a good point to call it an evening. There are a couple more questions, but they all get into much deeper questions about identity. And do you want one of them?
Sure.
Okay. Could a split personality be someone with multiple souls? Is the last one I was going to ask.
I have met some people who convincingly are what are broadly called multiples. The first person I met like this, who, I'll be honest, like at first I was like, this was someone who there was an original soul in the body, and I think that they themselves had been a multiple, which meant that there were a couple of other souls in there, so that they thought of themselves as a host. And I believe that they used to run a website called kinhost.org. So they saw themselves as a host. They had a partner who died. I forget the exact circumstances under which the person died. I don't know if it was an unforeseen, like, sudden thing. And the partner wasn't very keen on suddenly finding themselves dead. And so by kin hosts' perception, they were like, hey, just kind of hang out with me for a while. And so their dead partner kind of got added into this cluster and would sometimes step front. And, as somebody who's got a psych background and had read widely in DID and what we used to call multiple personality disorder, because it's fascinating. Like, it's super fascinating, especially the weird fact that the higher the IQ, the likelier someone is to split off like that. Like, there's a correlation that there's certain really complex ways that certain brains will cope with catastrophic trauma at certain ages. And what I can say is, I have been convinced in a few instances that this was absolutely going on. I have also met plenty of people who were themselves convinced that it was going on. And I lean more toward not even dissociative identity disorder so much as like mistaking how their brains worked. Like one of the people I met who was like, I am a multiple. I have many souls inside of me. Some days I feel like wearing red, and that's this guy. How about you just like red? Well, no, but other days I like blue, and when I like blue, I like this other stuff. I'm like, I think you're actually just a quirky person. And you're mistaking the fact that you have many facets to your personality at the end of the day, there's a question of like, is this part of your belief system? Does it help you order the world and make it make sense for you? Then it's not my right to tell you that you're full of shit if it's not hurting you or other people. But also don't make me buy into it. So, I mean, long story short, I have definitely seen instances where this is the case. It breaks my head a little bit, like this idea of multiple souls or souls that split off or like whatever, like it raises so many deep questions about so many things. Full disclosure, one of the reasons that I spent a lot of time trying to understand multiple personality disorder, DID, all of that cluster, dissociative personality disorder, is as someone who carries past life memories to the point where past life personalities can be so powerful, almost overwhelming. I don't talk about it a lot, but when, everybody has like an awakening story that is like kind of I think everybody has an uncomfortable awakening story where like something happens and it's like, whoa, like just way too much stuff is going on. And for me, it happened in 7th grade. We were on the Washington, D.C. trip. I had a couple of friends. Pearl, who you might know from the Dreamwalking book, was one of the friends that I was hanging out with at the time. And there'd been delays, and we arrived at the Washington Monument at night. It was dark. And so we pull in, and there's the reflecting pool and this huge Cleopatra's Needle. And, it took me years to realize that was probably the trigger, that like there's this line of trees, and then there's just the stone, and there's the reflecting pool. And if you don't know, the Washington Monument is built in the style of Cleopatra's Needle. It is an echo of a type of monument that was very common in ancient Egypt. And that reflecting pool is built to recreate a temple complex, the lead into one. So there's that. Not something I was expecting as a 7th grader. I didn't even like really think of that as a big thing. But what I can tell you is I stepped out of the bus. I was tired. And the image that hangs in my head is the monument, the water, black with the white monument kind of rippling in it. And I'm really glad that my friends wrangled me, because I apparently was speaking in tongues and completely out of my head for pretty much most of the rest of that night. I took off at a run trying to find something. I have only the most vague sense. And, you know, as somebody who was raised Catholic, there was a point where I'm like, was I possessed? Like, what was going on with that? And, you know, me being me, like, I chipped at it, and I kept chipping at it to go like, well, so what was this experience? Nobody had recorded what I did. My friends thought it was, honestly thought I was just fucking around. You know, it was like, oh, ha ha. The only person who took it seriously was Pearl, who was just always weird as shit. I still can't explain that person. She is, I'm 99% certain that Pearl was a walk-in. I have no other explanation for some of the experiences I had with her. But long story short is that was the first time where a past life came through so strongly when I was unprepared for it, that it took me over. That I was just like, and we're here now, and we are expecting the world to be exactly the way it was way back whenever the fuck.
So I know I said I was just going to ask that one more question,
Okay.
but now there is some
I
really
mean, we're
good
getting into
comments,
some like
and it's
really deep
so
stuff.
fun.
Like, this is something I like.
Yeah.
I don't talk about that experience a lot because, I mean, God, as a seventh grader, like seriously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you remember what we were talking about in the car before when we were going to get food?
Yeah. Okay.
Someone has a comment.
Okay.
I was told that you need to fix your past lives.
Okay.
I disagree with that. And we have been, like, we had a conversation about that
Yeah.
earlier today.
Okay. So
here we go,
yeah.
Melissa.
All right. Where do I even start? I talk about past lives a lot. They are a significant part of my personal experience, my belief, a lot of what I teach and help people through in House Keperu. And here's the first thing. The first thing I learned, just because I remember being an asshole back then, the only use that has, that's not necessarily like, I don't have to go back and fix that. I just have to go and say, hey, don't be that guy now. And you're not remembering your lives. Oh God, where do I start? First of all, let me say, you don't remember your past lives simply because you want to carry around a scrapbook of all the cool things you did. That's in the past. You're here in this life for a reason. What you've done, what you might remember, what you might bring forward as you work and do stuff, its value, if it's not instructive, is just, well, hey, that's cool. I mean, sure, I was a farmer in blah, blah, blah. Great, whatever. To me, the purpose of remembering past lives is it helps to know where it helps to decide where you're going if you know where you've been. I have some problems with karma as we've imported the term to the West. We kind of scooped the surface off of a fairly complicated Hindu concept. We left Dharma behind entirely, unless we're talking about the Dharma bums. and like there's a lot of concepts that just are lost with it. We think of karma as I did bad stuff, so now I have to make up for the bad stuff, and it's not that type of checks and balances at all. It's very different. Or karma as like the rule of three. So if you, I don't know, flipped off your Starbucks barista, then somebody's going to cut in front of you and flip you off, and that's your karma. And that's not where that word came from. That's not how that means. Like it's just not how that works. So I know a lot of people talk about past lives and karma, and even I have used the term to say, okay, I have some stuff that I consider karma to sort of like deal with a thing. Like I teach a lot about vampires and vampirism because there was a lifetime not all that long ago that I totally fucked up. I bungled. And the lesson in that life wasn't anything that I did, wasn't the fact that I slept my way across Europe, Jesus Christ, wasn't the fact that I indulged in opium. It was the fact that I ran away from who I was. Like any other thing about that life, and I'm sure I could dwell on it, was you fucked up because you were trying so hard not to be who you were. You were afraid of it. And yeah, you had excuses. You were raised a certain type of like really conservative Christian, and you were this and you were that, and it was, you know, it was the early 1800s, and fuck, there was a lot of stuff you weren't allowed to do. So of course you're going to act out. Great, but what's the lesson? Figure out who you are, and if you have inklings of it, be that person, and do it bravely and authentically. And you know, let your past inform you and enlighten you. Let it give you insight into quirks of your personality. Let it give you an idea of where certain habits or traumas may come from. Don't stop there. Work with all of that here and now, because that's why you're here. You're here to live this life. All that stuff has come before. And it's handy that you have some notes from it, that you've carried some stuff forward, that it may give you a deeper understanding of why you have this predilection or that predilection, or why there's just one thing you really don't like. But its greatest use is, what does it teach you about you right now?
Yeah, the thing that I always wonder when we're having these conversations is like, does it actually help you figure out what to do in the future?
Oh,
because as someone who doesn't have many past life memories, if any,
yeah,
like I know I have plans, I have goals, I have dreams, and I feel like to some degree it could only distract from those to know too much about what I've done in the past. Like, well, should I go back to doing that?
Probably not.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
that's the thing, is like, don't I've when I do
Mm.
past life regressions and stuff, I warn people, like, don't turn into that person who has their head turned on backwards, where like your body's walking forward and you're just looking back that way. Like, that's not the purpose. Don't plot your course to repeat the past. Like, get off the carousel. If you have done the same thing over and over again for 15 lifetimes in a row, that's probably a really great indication that you should stop doing that thing. You've done it. You've had the same results. There's that little quip about the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If you are doing that to your lives, try something new. Trust me, your soul will thank you for it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and asking all these great questions. I love the discussion that's happening in the comment section.
Yeah, I mean,
too.
I say this as somebody who remembers a lot more than I ever talk about. And, you know, it's cool, it's fun, it's really inconvenient sometimes. And at the end of the day, like, you're here right now. Who do you want to be? That's who you were. Who do you want to be? Bye.